Dear listener, settle back, tuck your blanket tight, and let me carry you to a time so long ago that even the oldest pyramids of Egypt were already ancient. It's the 9th century BCE, and the Mediterranean Sea shimmers like a sheet of blue glass, dotted with ships carrying goods and secrets between distant shores. In the Phoenician city of Tyre, on the coast of what is now Lebanon, a princess named Alyssa, whom the Greeks would later call Dido, is about to begin a journey that will change the face of the ancient world. Her story is wrapped in myth and mystery, like a treasure buried in sand, but its heart is true, a tale of betrayal, courage, and the stubborn hope of building something new from the ashes of loss. Alyssa's world shatters in a single, brutal moment. Her brother, Pygmalion, has just become king of Tyre, and he wants power, all of it. When Alyssa's husband, Acerbus, a wealthy priest with a treasure hoard that Pygmalion covets, refuses to bow to the new king, Pygmalion strikes. He has Acerbus murdered in the night, his blood staining the palace floors. It was an accident, Pygmalion lies to Alyssa, but she sees the greed in his eyes. She knows she's next if she stays. So she runs. Not alone, she gathers Acerbus's loyal followers, slips into the palace treasury, and loads their ships with gold, silver, and the few possessions they can carry. The Phoenicians are master sailors, their cedarwood ships sleek and fast, built to navigate even the stormiest seas. By dawn, Alyssa and her refugees are fleeing Tyre, the city of her birth shrinking behind them as they sail west, toward the unknown. "We'll find a new home," she promises her people, her voice steady even as her heart aches. "Somewhere Pygmalion's reach can't touch us." Their voyage is long and perilous. They sail past Cyprus, where they pick up more followers, and Rhodes, where they trade for supplies. They skirt the Greek colonies of Sicily, where the locals eye their strange ships with suspicion. For months, the horizon is nothing but water and sky, until one morning, a sailor shouts, "Land!" It is North Africa, a vast, sun-baked coast where the Mediterranean meets the Sahara. Here, near what is now Tunis, they drop anchor. The land is fertile, with olive groves and rolling hills, and a bay so sheltered it feels like a giant's hand cupped to protect them. But they are strangers here, and the local Berber king, Iarbas, watches their arrival from his hilltop fortress. Alyssa sends messengers to Iarbas, asking for permission to settle. The king, amused by these foreigners and their fancy ships, decides to test them. "I'll sell you as much land as an oxhide can cover," he says, thinking it a small, mocking gift. But Alyssa is clever. Oh, so clever. She thanks Iarbas, then orders her people to take the oxhide and cut it, not into strips, but into threads, thin as spider silk. When they lay these threads in a circle on the hilltop, they form a boundary large enough to enclose a substantial settlement. "This is our land," Alyssa tells Iarbas, who laughs at her ingenuity. He keeps his word, and the refugees set to work. That hilltop, which they call Bursa, from the Greek word for oxhide, becomes the heart of their new city. They build wooden huts clustered around the harbor, workshops where artisans hammer bronze into tools and glass into beads, and a simple temple to Tanit, the Phoenician goddess of fertility and the moon, whose symbol, a triangle with a circle, will soon be carved into every stone. Why did they choose this spot? Let me ask you, have you ever picked a place to build a treehouse, and realized it was perfect, shaded, safe, close to your friends? That's what this coast was for Alyssa. The harbor protected their ships from storms. The hill made it easy to defend. Most importantly, it sat at the narrowest part of the Mediterranean, where Africa almost touches Sicily. Any ship traveling between east and west would sail right past, perfect for traders like the Phoenicians. Within years, the settlement grows. Phoenician merchants from Tyre and Sidon hear about this new outpost and start stopping by, trading cedar wood and purple dye, made from crushed snails, worth more than gold, for silver from Spain and tin from Britain. The refugees learn to farm the rich soil, growing wheat and olives, and to fish the bountiful seas. They aren't just surviving, they're thriving. By 814 BCE, the city they name Carthage, New City, is more than a refuge. It's a community, with a marketplace where people haggle in Phoenician, Berber, and even a little Greek, and a council of elders to make decisions. Alyssa, now their queen, walks the streets every day, listening to her people's worries and dreams. "We are not Tyrians anymore," she tells them. "We are Carthaginians." Of course, myths grow up around her, as they do around all great founders. Some say she fell in love with Aeneas, a Trojan hero, and killed herself when he left her to found Rome. But that's just a story, told centuries later. The real Dido, Alyssa, lived and died building a city that would outlast her, a city that would one day challenge empires. As the sun sets over Carthage's first walls, casting gold light on the new temple of Tanit, Alyssa stands on Byrsa Hill, watching her people laugh and work. "This is just the beginning," she whispers. And she's right. From this tiny circle of oxhide threads, a maritime empire will rise, one that sails to the ends of the known world, trades with kings, and fights for its place in the sun. But for tonight, let's leave them there, safe, hopeful, building something new. After all, every great story starts with a single step, or a single ship, sailing toward the horizon. Imagine waking up in Carthage around 700 BCE. The sun rises over the bay, turning the water pink, and the first sounds you hear are the creak of wooden ships and the shouts of merchants unloading cargo. Cedar wood from Lebanon, purple dye from Tyre, and bronze tools from Cyprus are being carried to the marketplace, while donkeys bray under the weight of wheat sacks from the African interior. This is no longer just a refugee settlement, it's a city on the move, a place where the sea is both highway and treasure chest. Over the next 2 centuries, Carthage will grow from a humble town into a spider's web of trade, stretching across the Mediterranean like threads of gold. Let's start with the ships. The Phoenicians, Carthage's founders, have always been sailors, but their new home makes them bolder. They build broader, sturdier merchant ships, with curved hulls that can carry tons of cargo, barrels of olive oil, bundles of textiles, and even live animals. These ships don't race, they plod, because their goal isn't speed, it's to arrive with every jar and bolt of cloth intact. By the 8th century, Carthaginian captains are venturing beyond the familiar, west past Sicily, through the Strait of Gibraltar, which they call the Pillars of Hercules, and into the vast Atlantic Ocean. Why go so far? For tin. Tin is mixed with copper to make bronze, and the best tin comes from distant lands, Britain, some say, or maybe even West Africa. Getting it means navigating stormy seas and negotiating with strange tribes, but the profit is worth it. A single ship loaded with tin can buy a merchant a palace back in Carthage. The sea doesn't give gifts, old sailors say. You have to ask nicely, and bring something to trade. So Carthaginian ships carry more than just goods, they carry glass beads, Phoenician pottery, and lengths of fine linen to exchange for what they need. Along the way, they start building trading posts, small forts with warehouses and docks, like seeds planted along the coast. In Spain, they set up camp near the silver-rich rivers of Tartessos, where local chiefs are happy to trade metal for Carthaginian wine. In the Balearic Islands, They trade with shepherds who make the best slingshots in the Mediterranean, weapons that will one day fight alongside Carthaginian armies. Even in distant Morocco, they leave pottery shards and bits of jewelry, silent evidence of their comings and goings. These posts aren't colonies, exactly. Carthage doesn't send armies to conquer, it sends merchants to negotiate. You let us trade here, and we'll share our profits, they tell local leaders. More often than not, the leaders agree. Why fight when you can get rich together? This is how Carthage's empire grows, not through war, but through deals. Back home, the city is changing too. The original hill of Bursa is now surrounded by neighborhoods, a quarter for metalworkers, a district for shipbuilders, and a busy harbor divided into two parts. The outer harbor is for merchant ships, where dockworkers load and unload cargo from dawn till dusk. The inner harbor is a secret, a circular basin hidden behind walls, where warships are built and repaired. We're traders, not warriors, Carthaginians say, but they know, to protect their ships, they need swords too. The government is run by merchant families, rich from generations of trade. They meet in a council chamber on Bursa Hill, arguing over which ports to prioritize and how much to tax incoming goods. Every year, they elect two leaders called suffetes, like Roman consuls, but real power lies with the wealthiest families, the ones who own the biggest ships and the most trading posts. It's not a democracy, but it works. These families know that if Carthage prospers, they prosper too. Religion weaves through daily life, binding the city together. The Temple of Tanit, now rebuilt in stone, towers over the marketplace. Her priestesses wear long blue robes and offer incense to ensure safe voyages. Beside her temple stands a shrine to Baal Hammon, the god of storms and fertility, whose priests sacrifice animals, and, some say, occasionally children in times of crisis, to keep the gods happy. The sea is our life, a sailor prays before setting sail, but the gods are our compass. By the 6th century BCE, Carthage is rich beyond Alyssa's wildest dreams. Its merchants are celebrities, telling tales of lands where the sun sets over endless oceans and people ride camels. The city's workshops turn out luxury goods, gold jewelry inlaid with ivory, pottery painted with scenes of ships and sea monsters, and glassware so clear it looks like water frozen in time. Even kings in Egypt and Assyria know the name Carthage, and they want its goods. But success brings new problems. Greek colonists are also spreading west, settling in Sicily and southern Italy. They want the same trade routes, the same metals, the same markets. In 535 BCE, Carthaginian and Greek ships clash off the coast of Corsica. It's a small battle, but it's a warning. The Mediterranean is getting crowded, and not everyone wants to share. One evening, a young merchant stands on Bursa Hill, watching his ship being loaded for Spain. "My grandfather traded only with Tyre," he says to his son. "I trade with the ends of the earth." His son asks, "Will we always be rich?" The merchant smiles. "As long as we respect the sea, and our enemies," he says. "As long as that." And so the stage is set. Carthage has built an empire of commerce, one deal at a time. But storms are coming, storms that will test whether a kingdom built on trade can survive when swords are drawn. For now, though, the ships sail on, and the markets bustle, and Carthage shines like a pearl in the African sun. Close your eyes and picture Sicily, a triangular jewel floating in the Mediterranean. Its fields burst with wheat, its hills hide veins of silver, and its ports dot the coast like scattered coins. By the 6th century BCE, this island is the prize in a silent race. To the east, Greek colonists from Corinth and Sparta have built thriving cities like Syracuse and Agrigentum, their white temples gleaming on hilltops. To the west, Carthaginian traders have planted their own outposts, Motia, Panormus, Lilybaeum, fortresses with walls thick enough to keep out any enemy. For a while, they coexist. Greeks sell pottery to Carthaginians, who sell tin to Greeks, and the sea between them stays calm. But as both sides grow richer, greed flickers to life. Why share Sicily, each thinks, when we could own it? The first sparks fly over small things: a disputed trading post, a stolen cargo of grain, a fishing boat seized for trespassing. But by the 5th century, the fights grow bigger. Carthage sends ships to support Greek tyrants who favor Punic trade. Greek cities ally with Libyan tribes angry at Carthaginian taxes. It's like two neighbors bickering over a fence, except the fence is an island, and the bickering uses swords instead of words. In 480 BCE, the tension snaps. That year, a Carthaginian general named Hamilcar, not the same as Hannibal's father, but a namesake, sails for Sicily with the largest army the island has ever seen. Legend says he brings 300,000 men, probably an exaggeration, but still enough to make the Greeks tremble. His goal: crush Syracuse, burn the Greek cities, and make Sicily a Punic lake. This will end the quarrels, Hamilcar declares as his ships land near the town of Himera. But the Greeks are ready. Gelon, the tyrant of Syracuse, has allied with Theron of Agrigentum, and their armies meet Hamilcar's forces outside Himera. The battle starts at dawn, the air thick with the clash of spears and the roar of elephants. Carthage has brought these exotic beasts to terrify the Greeks. For hours, the fight swings back and forth. Carthaginian cavalry charges, Greek hoplites form a wall of shields, arrows darken the sky like locusts. Then, something goes wrong for Hamilcar. A Greek detachment circles behind his lines, seizing his camp and setting fire to the tents. When the Carthaginian soldiers see their supplies burning, they panic. Retreat, someone shouts, and the order spreads like a virus. Hamilcar tries to rally them, but it's too late. The Greeks chase the fleeing army into the sea, where thousands drown or are cut down on the beaches. Hamilcar himself dies in the flames of his own headquarters, either by suicide or in battle, no one is sure. The defeat at Himera is a punch to Carthage's gut. The army is shattered, the fleet scattered, and Sicily remains firmly in Greek hands. Worse, the victory makes Syracuse a powerhouse. Its tyrants strut through the Mediterranean, boasting that they tamed the Phoenician wolves. For a generation, Carthage stays quiet in Sicily, licking its wounds. But here's the thing about Carthaginians: they don't stay down for long. Himera teaches them a harsh lesson: trade alone won't protect their empire. They need better armies, smarter generals, and a willingness to fight when deals fail. So they rebuild. They hire more mercenaries, Iberian swordsmen with curved blades, Numidian horsemen who ride like the wind, Balearic slingers who can hit a bird in flight. They study Greek tactics, adapting the hoplite phalanx to work with their own troops. We'll go back to Sicily, they vow, but next time, we'll win. Slowly, they creep back. They rebuild Motia, strengthening its walls and digging a moat around it. They make alliances with Greek cities that hate Syracuse, promising to protect them in exchange for tribute. By 410 BCE, they're ready to strike again, this time against Selinus, a Greek city that has been raiding their territory. The siege of Selinus is brutal. Carthaginian catapults hurl boulders at the walls, while starving citizens eat rats to survive. When the city falls, its people are sold into slavery, a warning to others who cross Carthage. But Syracuse strikes back. In 409 BCE, its army crushes a Carthaginian force at Himera, the same battlefield where Hamilcar fell. They raze the town, scattering its stones into the sea. "This is for 480, they shout. It's a cycle: conquest, revenge, conquest again, and Sicily bleeds for it. Why does Sicily matter so much? Let's wonder. It's not just about wheat or silver. For Carthage, controlling Sicily would mean controlling the Mediterranean's throat. Ships from east to west would have to ask them for permission to pass. For the Greeks, losing Sicily would mean losing their westernmost outpost, a buffer against Punic expansion. It's about power, the kind that comes from owning the right piece of land. By the end of the 5th century, neither side has won. Carthage holds western Sicily, the Greeks hold the east, and the middle is a no-man's land where bandits and mercenaries roam. But the struggle has changed Carthage. It's no longer just a trading city with a navy, it's a military power, willing to bleed for what it wants. And in Syracuse, a new tyrant named Dionysius I is building a fleet bigger than anything Carthage has ever seen. As the 4th century dawns, the island waits. The next chapter of the struggle will be bloodier, cleverer, and more dangerous than anything before. But for now, the sea between Africa and Sicily is quiet, as if holding its breath. Let's drift into the harbor of Carthage around 400 BCE. The sun glints off the water, where hundreds of ships rock gently at anchor. Merchant vessels, broad and bulbous, are being loaded with olive oil from Africa and silver from Spain. Beside them, sleek warships lie in wait, long, low, and deadly, their bronze rams shining like teeth. This is no ordinary port. It's a masterpiece of engineering: 2 harbors, one circular for warships and one rectangular for trade, connected by a narrow channel that can be sealed with iron chains. From the shore, you'd never guess the military harbor exists. It's hidden behind walls, a secret weapon for a city that knows the sea is both its life and its shield. By the 5th century BCE, Carthage's navy is the envy of the Mediterranean. Its ships aren't just bigger, they're smarter. The standard warship, a trireme, has 3 banks of oars, 170 rowers working in perfect rhythm to propel it at speeds no Greek or Roman vessel can match. But what truly terrifies enemies is the ram, a bronze beak mounted on the bow, designed to smash through enemy hulls like a fist through pottery. Carthaginian captains have mastered a tricky maneuver called the periplus, circling behind enemy ships and ramming them from the side, where their hulls are weakest. A good sailor doesn't need numbers, old salts say. He needs wind, waves, and a sharp ram. This naval power isn't just for show. It's the glue that holds Carthage's empire together. With its fleet, Carthage can protect its merchant ships from pirates, enforce trade monopolies, and strike at enemies before they reach African soil. When Greek cities in Sicily try to block Carthaginian traders, a fleet sails north and burns their docks. When Libyan tribes raid coastal towns, warships appear overnight, chasing the raiders into the desert. "The sea is our wall," a Carthaginian senator boasts. "And our ships are the stones." But even the strongest empire needs friends, or at least, rules. In 509 BCE, a delegation from Rome arrives in Carthage. The Romans are a small power then, ruling just a fraction of Italy, but they're eager to trade. The 2 cities sign a treaty. Carthage lets Rome trade in its western Mediterranean ports, and Rome promises to stay out of Sicily and North Africa. It's a fragile agreement, like a truce between wolves and lions, but it holds for centuries. Why? Because both sides benefit. Carthage gets access to Italian grain, and Rome avoids a fight with a naval superpower. For a while, the Mediterranean hums with this balance. Carthage rules the waves, Rome dominates central Italy, and Greece controls the east. Traders sail from Carthage to Rome with purple dye, from Rome to Syracuse with pottery, and from Syracuse to Carthage with silk. It's not perfect, there are squabbles, of course, but for 200 years, no one tries to tip the scales. Carthage uses this peace to expand its trade network. In Spain, its settlers found New Carthage, Cartagena, a fortress and silver mine rolled into one. Silver from here flows into Carthage's treasury, funding bigger ships and fancier temples. In North Africa, farmers learned to grow new crops, grapes for wine, figs for export, turning the desert edges into fertile fields. Even distant Britain hears of Carthage. Tin from Cornwall starts appearing in Carthaginian markets, carried by merchants who brave the stormy Atlantic. The city itself blooms. Bursa Hill is now crowned with a grand temple to Tanit, its columns carved with scenes of ships and sea monsters. The marketplace, once a cluster of stalls, is a maze of shops where you can buy Egyptian papyrus, Persian carpets, and even Indian spices. Rich merchants build mansions with courtyards and mosaic floors, while ordinary people live in small, whitewashed houses, their doors painted blue to ward off evil. But beneath the prosperity, cracks are forming. In Sicily, Greek cities like Syracuse grow bolder, raiding Carthaginian outposts. In Italy, Rome swallows its neighbors, uniting the peninsula under its rule. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome has a large army and a hunger for more, including Sicily, that jewel of the Mediterranean. In 264 BCE, the balance snaps. A band of mercenaries seize the Sicilian town of Messana, and both Carthage and Rome rush to help. Carthage sends a garrison first, but Rome, seeing a chance to grab Sicily, sends an army. The mercenaries switch sides, and suddenly, Roman legions are on Sicily, violating that old treaty. Carthage is furious. "You've crossed a line," its ambassadors shout in Rome. The Romans reply, "Sicily isn't yours to guard." It's the start of something terrible, the First Punic War, a struggle that will last 23 years and change both civilizations forever. But for now, let's pause. The sun sets over Carthage's harbor, painting the ship's gold. A sailor hums a Phoenician song as he mends his nets. A merchant counts silver coins, dreaming of Spain. No one knows the storm that's coming. Sometimes, the calmest moments are just the breath before the storm. Imagine a summer day in 264 BCE, when a messenger rides breathless into Carthage's forum, his tunic stained with dust. "The Mamertines," he gasps. "They've seized Messana." The crowd murmurs. The Mamertines, sons of Mars, are Italian mercenaries who've been hired by Syracuse to fight, but now they've turned on their employers, taking over the Sicilian town of Messana, which guards the narrow strait between Sicily and Italy. It's a small problem, at first, just another band of troublemakers. But no one knows yet, this squabble over a single town will ignite a war that burns for 23 years, a war that will rewrite the rules of power in the Mediterranean. Carthage acts first. Its fleet sails to Messana, and a garrison occupies the citadel. "We'll sort this out," Carthaginian officials say, used to solving problems with gold and threats. But the Mamertines, fearing Syracuse's revenge, send messengers to Rome, begging for help. Carthage will swallow Sicily, they warn the Roman Senate, and then they'll come for Italy. The Senate debates for days. Rome and Carthage have been allies for centuries, bound by that old treaty. We promised not to interfere in Sicily, traditionalists argue. But the younger senators, hungry for glory and land, shout them down. Carthage is getting too strong, they say. If we don't stop them now, we'll regret it. Finally, they vote, Rome will help the Mamertines. It's a bold, reckless move. Rome has no navy to speak of, just legions trained to fight on land. Carthage rules the waves, with ships that have dominated the Mediterranean for generations. This is madness, old soldiers mutter. But the Romans are stubborn. They cross the strait with 2 legions, and through a trick, bribing the Mamertines to open the gates, they kick the Carthaginian garrison out of Messana. Carthage is stunned. This is betrayal, its leaders fume. They send an army to retake Messana, and Syracuse, fearing Rome more than Carthage, joins them. The First Punic War has begun. At first, it's a mismatch. Carthage's navy blockades Sicily, stopping Roman supplies from reaching their troops. Roman legions win land battles, but without ships, they can't push Carthage out of the island. We need a fleet, the Senate admits. So they do something audacious, they capture a wrecked Carthaginian warship and copy it. In 2 years, they build 120 triremes, crewed by farmers and shopkeepers who've never seen the sea. But these new sailors don't know how to outmaneuver Carthage's veteran captains. So the Romans invent a secret weapon, the corvus, a raven bridge. It's a plank with a spike on the end, mounted on a mast. When a Roman ship gets close to a Carthaginian one, they drop the corvus, and the spike digs into the enemy's deck, locking the ships together. Then Roman legionaries rush across, turning a sea battle into a land battle, where they know how to fight. The first test comes at the Battle of Mylae in 260 BCE. The Carthaginian admiral, Hannibal, not the famous one, laughs when he sees the clunky Roman ships. Farmers can't sail, he says. But when the corvi drop, his sailors panic. Roman soldiers swarm their decks, killing or capturing everyone. By sunset, Rome has captured 30 Carthaginian ships. We can win this, the Romans cheer. But the war drags on. Year after year, armies march and ships clash. Carthage recaptures towns in western Sicily, Rome takes others in the east. In 256 BCE, Rome tries something even bolder, invading Africa. A fleet carries 30,000 soldiers across the Mediterranean, defeating a Carthaginian navy at Ecnomus in the largest sea battle of ancient times. For a moment, Carthage itself seems in danger. But Africa is not Sicily. The Roman general, Regulus, raids the countryside, but a Spartan mercenary named Xanthippus trains Carthage's army, teaching them to use elephants and cavalry to shatter Roman lines. At the Battle of Tunis, Regulus is captured, his army destroyed. "This is our land," Carthaginians shout, but they can't push the Romans out of Sicily. The war becomes a grind, a contest of endurance. Carthage's treasury empties, Rome's population shrinks as men die in battle. By 241 BCE, both sides are exhausted. Carthage, short on money, sends a fleet to Sicily with supplies for its starving army. But the Roman navy intercepts them at the Aegates Islands. It's a slaughter, 50 Carthaginian ships are sunk, 70 captured. Carthage has no fight left. It sues for peace. The terms are harsh. Carthage must leave Sicily. It must pay Rome 3,200 talents, about 80 tons of silver, over 10 years. It can't fight Rome's allies without permission. Sicily becomes Rome's first overseas province. But the worst is yet to come. While Carthage is weak, Rome seizes Sardinia and Corsica, demanding more money. You broke the peace, Rome lies. Carthage, too tired to fight, agrees. In Carthage, the mood is bitter. We'll never forgive this, sailors mutter in taverns. A young general named Hamilcar Barca, who fought in Sicily, takes his 9-year-old son, Hannibal, to a temple. Swear, he tells the boy, placing his hand on a sacrifice, that you will hate Rome forever. Hannibal swears. And so the First Punic War ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. Rome has become a naval power, but Carthage simmers with resentment. As the years pass, Hamilcar sails to Spain, building a new empire there, mining silver and training armies. We'll get our revenge, he promises. Why did Rome win? Let's think. It wasn't just the Corvus, or better soldiers. It was stubbornness. Rome refused to quit, even when defeat seemed certain. Carthage, with its merchant mindset, calculated costs and decided the war wasn't worth it. But some debts can't be paid with silver, only blood. As you settle deeper into your bed, imagine a Carthaginian mother telling her child stories of Sicily. We used to trade there, she says. One day, we'll go back. The child nods, not knowing that his generation will fight a war even more terrible than the last. The sun sets over Carthage in 241 BCE, but its light feels cold. The city's walls still stand, its markets still hum, but there's a heaviness in the air, a mix of shame and anger. The First Punic War is over, and Carthage has lost. Sicily is gone, Sardinia and Corsica stolen, and the treasury is empty, drained by 23 years of fighting. In the forum, old men shake their heads, muttering about Roman treachery, while young boys play at war, stabbing sticks into the dirt and shouting, "For Carthage." Among the crowd stands Hamilcar Barca, a general who fought in Sicily. His armor is dented, his face lined with scars, but his eyes burn like coals. He was there when Regulus invaded Africa, when the Roman ravens first crashed into Carthaginian ships, when the treaty was signed, that treaty, with its harsh terms and sneering Roman ambassadors. This is not the end, he tells anyone who will listen. This is just the beginning. But Hamilcar knows Carthage isn't ready to fight Rome again. The oligarchs in the council are too busy counting coins, too afraid to risk another war. So he hatches a plan, one so bold it borders on madness. He will sail to Spain, a land of silver and warriors, and build a new empire there. With Spanish silver, he'll fund an army. With Spanish warriors, he'll train a force that can crush Rome. And when the time is right, he'll cross the Pyrenees, march into Italy, and make Rome pay. In 237 BCE, Hamilcar set sail for Spain with his family, his sons Hannibal, Hasdrubal, and Mago, and his son-in-law Hasdrubal, not the same as his son. The journey is rough, but when they land near modern Cartagena, Hamilcar smiles. The coast is dotted with Phoenician trading posts, remnants of old Tyre's empire, and the hills glow with the promise of silver. Here, he says, we will rise again. He starts by making friends. The local tribes, the Iberians, are tough fighters, but they've been exploited by Greek traders. Hamilcar offers them better deals, trade with us, and we'll protect you from raiders. He marries his daughter to a powerful Iberian chief, sealing the alliance with a feast of roasted lamb and honey wine. Carthage is your friend, he tells them, and for a while, they believe him. Next, he builds a city, Carthage, New Carthage. It's a masterpiece, with a harbor that can hold 200 ships and walls that climb the surrounding hills. Beneath it lie silver mines, their tunnels snaking deep into the earth. Thousands of miners, slaves and Iberian workers, hack at the rock, and carts loaded with ore trundle into the city, where smelters turn it into shiny ingots. This silver is our sword, Hamilcar tells his sons. He also builds an army. Iberian warriors, with their curved swords and leather shields, join his ranks, drawn by the promise of plunder and glory. Hamilcar trains them in Carthaginian tactics, teaching them to fight in formation alongside Libyan spearmen and Numidian cavalry. "We will not just fight like Romans," he says. "We will fight better." Young Hannibal grows up in this world of swords and silver. At 9, he's already taller than most boys, with a sharp mind and a fierce temper. He watches his father negotiate with chiefs, then train with the soldiers until his hands bleed. Rome is not unbeatable, Hamilcar tells him, showing him maps of Italy. They have legions, but we have the mountains, the winter, and surprise. One day, Hamilcar takes Hannibal to a sacred cave, where priests chant in the old Phoenician tongue. He makes the boy place his hand on a sacrifice, a bull, its blood still warm, and swear, by Tanit and Baal Hamon, I will never be friends with Rome. I will fight them until they are dust. Hannibal swears, his voice steady, and Hamilcar nods. Good, he says. The future is yours. Tragedy strikes in 228 BCE. Hamilcar is fighting a tribe in northern Spain when he falls into a river and drowns. His men mourn, but the plan doesn't die. Hasdrubal, Hamilcar's son-in-law, takes over. He's not a warrior like Hamilcar, but a diplomat. He signs treaties with more tribes, builds roads to connect New Carthage to the mines, and even makes a deal with Rome: we'll stay south of the Ebro River if you stay north. Rome agrees. They're busy fighting in Illyria and don't notice the growing power in Spain. Hasdrubal's rule is peaceful, but short. In 221 BCE, a disgruntled Iberian chief assassinates him. The army turns to the obvious choice, Hannibal, now 26. He's young, but he's proven himself, leading raids, negotiating with tribes, even outsmarting a Roman spy. My father's work will continue, he tells the soldiers, drawing his sword. And soon, we will cross the Ebro. Soon, we will cross the Alps. Soon, Rome will learn to fear the name Barca. Why does Spain matter so much? Let's see. It's not just about silver, though that pays for the army. It's about space, a place where Carthage can rebuild without Roman interference. It's about warriors, men who've never heard of Rome's invincibility. And it's about pride, a chance to show the world that Carthage isn't broken. As Hannibal takes command, New Carthage is thriving. Ships carry silver to Africa, returning with olive oil and grain. The army drills daily, its ranks swollen with Iberians, Libyans, and even a few Greeks. In the Temple of Tanit, priests offer prayers for victory. The time is near, they whisper. And in Rome, senators debate whether to worry about Spain. Carthage is weak, some say. Let them play in their minds. But a few, like the elder Cato, shake their heads. A snake grows in the west, he warns. We should crush it before it strikes. But it's too late. Hannibal is already planning. He sends spies to Italy, mapping mountain passes and counting Roman legions. He trains his elephants, 37 of them, from Africa, to march in cold weather. He dreams of the day he'll stand on the banks of the Tiber, looking at Rome's walls. As you drift toward sleep, imagine Hannibal standing on a hill in Spain, staring north. Behind him, his army waits. Below, new Carthage sparkles in the sun. Soon, he says to the wind. Soon. The summer of 218 BCE hung heavy over the Mediterranean, but in Spain, a wind of purpose stirred. Hannibal Barca stood at the edge of his camp, gazing north toward the Pyrenees. Behind him, his army waited, rows of Iberian swordsmen with their curved blades, Numidian horsemen patrolling on lean, swift horses, and 37 elephants, their hides glistening in the sun, their trunks snuffling at the air. For years, he had dreamed of this moment, not just to fight Rome, but to carry the fight to its doorstep. His path was bold, carved through lands no Carthaginian army had ever crossed. They marched through the sun-baked hills of Spain, then into the forests of Gaul, where tribesmen watched from the trees, curious and cautious. Hannibal spoke their language, offered them gifts, silver from his mines, promises of freedom from Roman taxes, and most joined him. "We march to break Rome's chains," he told them, and their cheers echoed through the valleys. But the Rhone River stood in their way, its currents swift and cold. On the far bank, a Roman army waited, sent by Publius Scipio to block their path. Hannibal did not hesitate. He sent his Numidians slipping upstream in small boats, looping around to attack the Romans from behind. The enemy fled, and his men lashed rafts together, the elephants swimming alongside, their trumpets roaring as water sloshed over their backs. Scipio, wounded but stubborn, sent messengers racing to Rome. "He is not bound for Sicily," they cried. "He marches for Italy." But the Senate laughed. "Over the Alps? With elephants? It is folly," they said, and turned their attention to other wars. The Alps loomed ahead, a wall of stone and ice. In October, the passes were already choked with snow, the air thin and bitter. Soldiers stumbled on icy rocks, their boots crusted with frost. Pack mules slipped and fell, their cargoes of grain and weapons vanishing into the gorges below. The elephants, unused to the cold, shivered, their ears drooping. Hannibal walked among them, his own cloak wrapped tight, speaking to his men. "Do you see those peaks?" he said, pointing to the south. "Beyond them lies Italy. Beyond Italy, victory." A Gallic tribe, sensing weakness, attacked their camp one night, stealing supplies and killing stragglers. Hannibal's men fought back, but by dawn, 20,000 were gone, dead, lost, or fled. Only 20 elephants remained, their spirits as broken as their tusks. When they finally crested the last pass and looked down on the green plains of Italy, the army that marched into the valley was half the size it had been. But their eyes blazed with a fire no cold could dim. Rome woke at last. The consul Tiberius Sempronius marched north, eager to crush this invader before he could gather strength. They met at the Trebia River, its banks lined with reeds, the water so cold it stung. Sempronius, ignoring the frost on his men's armor, ordered an attack. Hannibal had been waiting. His men lay hidden in the reeds, warm by fires, while the Romans waded through the icy river, their teeth chattering. At the signal, the Carthaginians charged. The Romans, cold and slow, fell in heaps. By nightfall, the Trebia ran red. Panic rippled through Italy. Farmers abandoned their fields, cities barred their gates, and mothers whispered prayers that their sons would not be called to fight. Hannibal marched south, burning Roman farms but sparing the towns of Rome's allies. "We are not your enemies," he told them, and some believed him, opening their gates to feed his army. In 217 BCE, another Roman consul, Gaius Flaminius, chased him to Lake Trasimene, a sheet of water ringed by steep hills. The morning was foggy, the air thick with mist. Hannibal's men waited in the shadows, their breath visible in the cold. When Flaminius marched into the valley, the mist lifted just enough for him to see the trap, and then the Carthaginians roared down, blocking the way in and out. The Romans fought blindly, hacked down where they stood, their blood seeping into the lake. Flaminius died there, his body lost in the chaos. Rome trembled. The Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, a man who moved like a tortoise, slow and steady. "We will not meet him in battle," Fabius said. "We will follow, and wait." He shadowed Hannibal, burning the crops in his path, letting hunger and weariness eat at the Carthaginian army. But the people grew restless. "He is a coward," they muttered. "Why do we not fight?" In 216 BCE, their wish was granted. The consuls Lucius Paulus and Gaius Varro gathered 86,000 men, the largest army Rome had ever fielded, and marched to Cannae, a plain where the Aufidus River curved like a scythe. Hannibal, with 40,000 men, waited for them. He arranged his soldiers in a crescent, weak Gauls in the center, strong Libyan spearmen on the flanks. Varro, seeing the thin center, ordered his legions to charge. The Gauls fell back, drawing the Romans in deeper and deeper, until the Libyans turned inward, like jaws clamping shut. The Numidian cavalry chased Rome's horsemen from the field, then circled back to attack the rear. The sun beat down as the slaughter began. Roman soldiers, packed together like sheep, could not raise their swords. By evening, 50,000 lay dead, including Paulus and 80 senators. Varro escaped with a handful of men, his tunic stained with blood. Hannibal's soldiers collected the gold rings of the dead, filling buckets with them, a trophy of victory so heavy it would take years to send home. Hannibal marched on Rome, his army singing Carthaginian songs. He camped outside the walls, watching the Capitol hill glow in the sunset. But the gates stayed closed. Rome's walls were too thick, its people too stubborn to surrender. "I have beaten their armies," he told his officers, "but not their will." The wind carried the stench of death from Cannae to Rome. Women wailed in the streets, and the Senate passed laws to keep people from fleeing. No one could leave the city, no one could speak of peace. "We will fight until the end," they declared, and for a moment, the gods seemed to listen. But Hannibal, camped in the south of Italy, knew his triumph was fragile. His army shrank with each battle, and no reinforcements came from Carthage. The allies he had hoped to win over stayed loyal to Rome, fearing its wrath more than his promises. For all his victories, he was a stranger in a strange land, and the winter winds were starting to blow. Cannae cast a shadow over Rome that stretched for years. The fields outside the city were still stained with blood when news reached the Senate, 50,000 dead, including 80 senators, their bodies left to rot where they fell. For 3 days, the city fell silent. Mothers lit candles in their windows, waiting for sons who would never return. Merchants shuttered their shops, their counters empty of the usual bustle. In the forum, a few voices dared to whisper, "What if we cannot win?" But Rome did not break. The Senate met in emergency session, its members pale but unbowed. They passed laws that would have seemed unthinkable in calmer times, freeing thousands of slaves to serve in the legions, taxing the wealthy to fill the empty treasury, even burying 2 Greeks alive in the heart of the city, a grim ritual to appease the gods. "Rome has faced worse," declared the consul, his voice rough with grief. "We will rise. We will fight." The man they turned to was Quintus Fabius Maximus, a general with a face lined like old leather and a mind as steady as stone. Fabius had watched Hannibal outmaneuver Rome's armies time and again, and he understood the enemy's weakness. Hannibal was far from home, feeding his army on stolen grain and borrowed loyalty. "We will not meet him in open battle," Fabius told the Senate. "We will shadow him. We will burn his supplies. We will let time wear him down." It was a strategy that tried Rome's patience. Fabius and his legions followed Hannibal through the Italian countryside, never striking, always watching. When Hannibal raided a farm, Fabius burned the next 3, leaving nothing for the Carthaginians to steal. When Hannibal's foragers strayed from camp, Fabius's cavalry picked them off, one by one. "Coward!" crowds shouted as Fabius rode through the streets of Rome. Children mocked him, calling him cunctator, the delayer. But Fabius only smiled. "Better a coward than a fool," he said. Hannibal grew frustrated. He marched on Rome itself, camping outside the walls to taunt the defenders. "Come out and fight," his soldiers shouted, but the gates stayed closed. Rome's walls were thick, built over centuries, and Hannibal had no siege engines to breach them. After a week, he turned away, his army grumbling. "This is not war," his men muttered. "This is chasing ghosts." While Fabius wore down Hannibal in Italy, a young general named Publius Cornelius Scipio was learning the art of war in Spain. Scipio's father had died fighting Carthaginians there, and he burned with a quiet fury. He studied Hannibal's tactics, pored over maps of battles lost and won, and vowed to do better. "Hannibal is a man, not a god," Scipio told his men. "He can be beaten." In 210 BCE, Scipio led a daring raid on New Carthage, the heart of Carthaginian power in Spain. His soldiers scaled the city's walls under cover of night, surprising the garrison and seizing tons of silver, weapons, and grain. "This is just the start," Scipio said, and he kept his word. He defeated Hannibal's brothers, Hasdrubal and Mago, in battle after battle, winning over Spanish tribes who had once fought for Carthage. By 206 BCE, Spain was in Roman hands, and Hannibal's supply lines were cut. Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother, fled Spain with what was left of his army, determined to reach Italy and join forces with his brother. He marched over the Alps, retracing Hannibal's path, but Roman scouts tracked him every step. In 207 BCE, at the Metaurus River, the two armies clashed. Hasdrubal died in the fighting, and the Romans cut off his head, tossing it into Hannibal's camp as a grim message. When Hannibal saw his brother's head, he fell silent for a long time. "The end is near," he said. Hannibal's army was shrinking. His soldiers, many of them Gauls and Iberians, grew homesick. The Italian towns that once fed him now closed their gates, fearing Rome's wrath. His elephants, once a terror on the battlefield, had dwindled to a handful of gray, weary beasts. "We fight for a dream," his men whispered, "and dreams do not fill empty bellies." Scipio, now called Africanus for his victories in Spain, set his sights on Africa. "If we strike at Carthage," he told the Senate, "Hannibal will have to come home." The Senate hesitated. Memories of Regulus's disastrous invasion still lingered, but Scipio persuaded them. In 204 BCE, he sailed for Africa with 35,000 men, landing near Utica and burning Carthaginian farms to draw Hannibal out. Carthage panicked. "Send for Hannibal," the council shouted. After 15 years in Italy, Hannibal gathered his remaining soldiers and sailed home. As his ships left the Italian coast, he turned to look back, his eyes lingering on the hills where he had won his greatest victories. "I came to destroy Rome," he said, "but I made it stronger." The tide had turned. Rome, once on the brink of defeat, now held the initiative. Hannibal, once invincible, was heading home to defend a city that no longer believed in him. The war was far from over, but for the first time in years, Rome dared to hope. In the quiet of the Senate, Fabius and Scipio stood side by side, watching the sun set over the Tiber. "We have learned to fight differently," Fabius said. Scipio nodded. "We have learned to fight smarter." And somewhere in Africa, Hannibal stared at the same sun, wondering if he had ever really stood a chance. The dust of Zama settled slowly over Carthage. For a while, the city breathed in the silence of defeat. The treaty with Rome hung heavy in the air, no warships beyond a handful of small boats, no elephants, no armies beyond what was needed to guard the walls. Tax collectors from Rome lingered like crows, counting every talent of silver to ensure the indemnity was paid on time. Farmers who had fled the fighting crept back to their fields, finding olive groves trampled and wells poisoned, but they bent to the work of rebuilding anyway. Carthage, it seemed, was too old, too stubborn to die easily. Hannibal stayed on, trading his general's uniform for a magistrate's robes. The man who had once outwitted Roman legions now turned his genius to drains and granaries. He reformed the tax system, rooting out corruption that had drained the treasury for decades. He rebuilt the harbor, its docks now filled with merchant ships instead of war galleys, their holds brimming with grain from Africa, silk from the east, and spices that smelled of distant lands. "We will rise again," he told anyone who would listen, not with swords, but with ships and coins. And rise they did. Within a generation, Carthage was thriving. Its markets bustled with traders from Alexandria to Gades, haggling over purple dye and pottery. Its farmers learned to grow new crops, date palms and figs, that fetched high prices in Roman markets. The indemnity, once thought crushing, was paid ahead of schedule, the silver flowing from mines in Africa and trade routes that stretched across the desert. Young Carthaginians grew up knowing peace, their grandparents' tales of Hannibal's elephants seeming like myths. But across the sea, Rome watched, and worried. Senators who had fought at Zama told stories of Hannibal's cleverness, their voices tight with fear. "They forget too quickly," grumbled Cato the Elder, a tough old soldier who hated Carthage with a passion. He visited Africa on a diplomatic mission and returned shaking his fist. "They grow rich while we sleep," he shouted in the Senate, holding up a ripe Carthaginian figure. "This fruit grows 300 miles from Rome. Do you want their armies that close again?" After that, he ended every speech, no matter the topic, with the same words: "Carthage must be destroyed." Rome found ways to needle Carthage, little cuts that would keep it weak. They backed Massinissa, king of Numidia, a desert warrior who had fought with Scipio at Zama. Massinissa began nibbling at Carthaginian lands, seizing fertile valleys and olive groves. "They're ours by right," he claimed, and Rome nodded. When Carthage sent messengers to complain, the Senate shrugged. "Settle it among yourselves," they said, knowing Carthage could not fight back without permission. Hannibal, old and tired, saw the danger. "They want us to lash out," he warned the council. "Don't give them an excuse." But young hotheads shouted him down. "We're not cowards," they said. In 195 BCE, Rome demanded Hannibal's head, calling him a troublemaker. He fled Carthage, wandering from court to court in the east, a ghost of his former self. When Roman assassins finally cornered him in Bithynia, he drank poison from a ring, whispering, "Let me go before my honor is taken." Carthage mourned him, but life went on. The city grew richer, its ships sailing farther, its merchants growing bolder. But the Numidian raids grew worse, and Rome's silence grew heavier. In 151 BCE, the last installment of the indemnity was paid. "We are free," Carthaginians cheered, but Rome did not celebrate. Instead, they watched as Carthage, desperate, finally fought back against Massinissa, raising an army in secret. Rome pounced. "You broke the treaty," senators roared, sending an army to Africa. Carthage begged for mercy. "We'll disband the army," they said. "We'll give you hostages." But Rome wanted more. A delegation arrived with a final demand: move your city 10 miles inland. Leave the sea behind. The streets of Carthage erupted in cries of horror. To leave the sea was to die. Their ships, their trade, their very identity were bound to the water. "We'd rather burn," the people shouted. And so, in 149 BCE, Roman legions surrounded the city, and the Third Punic War began. Carthage, which had risen from ashes once, now faced the fire again. Its people had known peace for so long, but they remembered the old stories, of Hannibal, of Zama, of the sea that had been their home. They sealed the gates, sharpened their knives, and waited. The sun set over the harbor, gilding the ships that would never sail again. A mother tucked her son into bed, whispering, "Be brave, like the men who crossed the Alps." A merchant counted his coins, then melted them down to make swords. And on the walls, old men who had known Hannibal stood guard, their eyes fixed on the Roman camp, their hands gripping spears as if they could hold back the tide. The dust of Zama settled, and Carthage breathed again, though it was a cautious, measured breath. The treaty with Rome had stripped the city of its claws: no warships beyond a handful of fishing boats, no elephants, no right to raise an army without Roman permission. The indemnity of 10,000 talents loomed like a mountain, a weight that generations would have to bear. Yet within the walls, life stirred. Farmers returned to their fields, mending plows and planting olive saplings where the war had burned their groves. Merchants patched their ships, loading them with grain and pottery to trade along the African coast. Carthage, it seemed, was not ready to vanish. Hannibal, once the terror of Italy, turned his mind to drains and granaries. He traded his general's cloak for a magistrate's robes, walking the streets with a surveyor's staff in hand. The man who had outwitted Roman legions now outwitted corruption. He reformed the tax system, rooting out greedy officials who had siphoned off funds for decades. He dredged the harbor, deepening it to welcome larger ships, and built new markets where traders from Alexandria and Cyrene could barter their goods. "We will rise not with swords," he told the council, "but with silver and silk." And rise they did. The years slipped by, and Carthage's docks grew busy again. Purple dye from Tyre, glass from Sidon, and spices from the African interior filled its warehouses. Farmers in the countryside learned to grow date palms and pomegranates, their fruits fetching high prices in Roman markets. By 151 BCE, years ahead of schedule, the last installment of the indemnity was paid. The silver flowed not just from taxes, but from mines in Numidia and trade routes that stretched across the Sahara, where camel caravans carried goods to lands Rome had never heard of. Young Carthaginians knew only peace, their grandparents' tales of Hannibal's elephants sounding like fables. But across the sea, Rome watched with narrowed eyes. Senators who had fought at Zama still woke sweating, dreaming of elephants trampling their legions. "They forget too quickly," muttered Cato the Elder, a tough, gray-bearded man who hated Carthage with a passion stoked by old wounds. He visited Africa on a diplomatic mission, returning with a ripe Carthaginian fig in his hand. "This fruit grows a 3-day sail from Rome," he thundered in the Senate, holding it up for all to see. "Do you want their armies that close again?" From that day on, no matter the topic of his speeches, roads, grain, temples, he ended with the same words: Carthage must be destroyed. Rome found ways to keep Carthage in check, like a lion chained but still feared. They propped up Massinissa, king of Numidia, a wily desert warrior who had fought with Scipio at Zama. Massinissa began nibbling at Carthaginian lands, seizing fertile valleys and olive groves along the border. "They're ours by ancient right," he claimed, and Rome nodded approvingly. When Carthaginian ambassadors sailed to Rome to complain, the Senate waved them away. "Settle it among yourselves," they said, knowing full well that Carthage could not fight back without Roman permission. Hannibal saw the danger. "They want us to lash out," he warned the council. "Don't give them the excuse." But the young men, who had never known war, shouted him down. "We are not slaves," they said. In 195 BCE, Rome demanded Hannibal's head, calling him a troublemaker. He fled Carthage that night, slipping away in a small boat, a fugitive in the lands he had once sought to conquer. When Roman assassins cornered him years later in Bithynia, he drank poison from a ring, whispering, "Let me go before they take my honor." Carthage mourned him, but life rolled on. The markets stayed busy, the ships kept sailing, and the city grew richer. But Massinissa's raids grew bolder, and Rome's silence grew heavier. Carthaginian farmers fled their borderlands, their homes burned, their wells poisoned. "We must fight back," the people cried. In 149 BCE, they raised an army in secret, a ragtag force of farmers and tradesmen, and marched to meet Massinissa's warriors. Rome pounced. "They've broken the treaty," senators roared, sending an army to Africa. Carthage begged for mercy. "We'll disband the army," they said. "We'll give you hostages. We'll pay more tribute." But Rome wanted more. A delegation arrived with a final, cruel demand: dismantle your city. Move 10 miles inland. Leave the sea behind. The streets of Carthage erupted. To leave the sea was to die. Their identity, their livelihood, their very soul was bound to the water that had nourished them for centuries. "Burn us first," the people shouted. And so, in 149 BCE, Roman legions surrounded the city, and the Third Punic War began. Carthage's walls, once a pride of engineering, now loomed like a prison. Mothers tucked their children into cellars, whispering stories of Hannibal to steady their fears. Merchants melted down their silver cups to make swords. Old men, who had carried Hannibal's standards in Italy, climbed the walls to stand guard, their hands trembling but their backs straight. The sun set over the harbor, gilding the waves that would soon run red. Somewhere in the city, a priestess of Tanit lit incense, praying to the moon goddess who had watched over Carthage since its birth. "We have survived fire before," she whispered. "Let us survive it again." But this time, the fire would not be kind. The wind off the Mediterranean carried a tang of salt and fear that summer of 149 BCE. Carthage's walls, once a proud crown of stone and brick, now bristled with watchmen, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Beyond the harbor, Roman legions had camped, their tents white as mushrooms stretching to the edge of the sea. For weeks, messengers had shuttled between the city and the Roman camp, their voices growing thinner with each failed plea. "Dismantle your walls. Move inland. Leave the sea," the Romans had ordered. And Carthage had answered, as one, "No." The first stone fell on a quiet morning, lobbed from a Roman catapult. It crashed into a warehouse by the harbor, splintering wood and spilling jars of olive oil onto the cobblestones. A child screamed. A woman crossed herself, muttering a prayer to Tanit. Then the gates clanged shut, and Carthage settled in for a siege that would stretch into 3 long years. Inside the walls, life became a careful dance with scarcity. Farmers from the countryside, who had fled to the city for safety, shared their stored grain, handful by handful. Smiths melted down temple bells and statues of the gods to make swords and spears. Women wove linen into bandages, their fingers calloused from spinning day and night. Even children had jobs, carrying water from the wells, watching for cracks in the walls, or standing guard at alleyways, their small bodies hidden in shadows. The Romans, patient as stone, built a double wall around the city, sealing off every road, every path, every sliver of escape. Their ships blockaded the harbor, their oars slicing the water like scythes to turn back any vessel that dared try to slip in with supplies. "They'll starve," the Roman general muttered, watching smoke curl from Carthage's chimneys grow thinner each week. And starve they did. By the second winter, grain ran low. People ate weeds from the cracks in the streets, boiled leather from old sandals, even ground up bones to mix with what little flour remained. Disease followed hunger, fevers that burned hot as coals, coughs that racked bodies until they could barely stand. The dead were carried out at night, their faces covered, and buried in shallow pits beyond the temple of Baal Hammon. But still, the gates stayed closed. "We are Carthaginians," the elders said, their voices weak but unbroken. "This is our home." Hannibal was gone, but his spirit lingered. Old men who had marched with him in Italy told stories by firelight, of how he'd outsmarted Roman legions, of how he'd crossed the Alps with elephants, of how he'd once stood outside Rome's gates and laughed. "He taught us to fight," they said, and the young men listened, gripping their spears a little tighter. In the spring of 147 BCE, Scipio Aemilianus arrived to take command of the Roman army. He was a young man, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, and he brought with him a cold, methodical cruelty. He ordered his men to build a stone mole, a long, thick wall of rock, across the mouth of the harbor, sealing it off completely. "No more ships. No more hope," he said. But Carthage fought back. In secret, under cover of night, workers dug a new channel through the southern wall of the harbor, carving it through stone and earth until saltwater rushed in. From hidden shipyards, they launched a fleet of makeshift ships, hulls cobbled from old planks, sails stitched from bed linens, and sailed out to challenge the Roman blockade. For a moment, the old fire of Carthage's sailors blazed. They rammed Roman ships, boarded them, fought with knives and clubs when their swords broke. But there were too few of them. By sunset, the water was littered with splinters and bodies, and the last Carthaginian ship sank, its flag still flying. That winter was the cruelest. The city's wells ran dry, poisoned by Roman sappers who had tunneled beneath the walls. People collapsed in the streets, too weak to move. A mother, her child clinging to her, sang a Phoenician lullaby as they huddled in a doorway, their breath visible in the cold. A priestess of Tanit burned incense in the temple, even though there was little left to offer the gods. "We have kept our honor," she whispered. In the spring of 146 BCE, Scipio ordered the final assault. Roman soldiers swarmed over the walls, their shields locked together like a metal tide. Carthaginians fought back with whatever they had, stones, axes, even their bare hands. They defended their homes street by street, house by house, until the alleys ran red. A young girl, hiding in a cupboard, heard her father shout, "For Carthage," before the sound of his voice was cut short. An old craftsman, who had once made pottery for the market, smashed his last jug over a Roman soldier's head. By evening, the only resistance left was on Bursa Hill, where the temple of Tanit stood. The last defenders, priests, women, children, clung to the steps, their faces streaked with ash. When the Romans burst through the temple doors, they found people kneeling before the statue of Tanit, their hands raised in prayer. Scipio stood at the top of the hill, looking down at the city he had destroyed. Fires burned everywhere, their flames licking at the sky. The harbor, once a forest of masts, was a graveyard of sunken ships. He thought of the stories his grandfather had told him of Hannibal, of Zama, of a city that had once dared to dream of empire. For a moment, he felt not triumph, but a strange, hollow grief. "A great city has died," he said. The fires burned for 17 days. They consumed the warehouses, the temples, the homes where generations of Carthaginians had laughed and cried. When the smoke cleared, only ruins remained, broken walls, blackened stones, a few charred beams. The Romans sowed salt in the soil, a ritual to curse the land, so nothing would grow there again. Survivors, 50,000 out of a city that had once held 500,000, were sold into slavery, scattered across the Mediterranean like seeds in the wind. But stories are harder to burn than stone. In the markets of Rome, former slaves whispered of a city by the sea, where people had loved their gods and their ships more than their lives. Sailors passing the ruins claimed to hear voices on the wind, the creak of a ship's rigging, the laughter of children, the soft murmur of a priestess praying to Tanit. And somewhere, a mother told her child, as they huddled in a foreign land, "Once, there was a city built from an oxhide. Once, we were free." The wind still blows over those ruins, carrying the salt of the sea and the memory of a people who refused to be forgotten. The smoke cleared slowly from the ruins of Carthage, leaving a landscape of silence. Where once the harbor had hummed with the shouts of traders and the creak of ships, there was only the crash of waves against empty docks. The hill of Bursa, once crowned by the temple of Tanit, stood bare, its stones blackened by fire. Roman soldiers patrolled the ruins, their boots crunching on ash, but even they moved quietly, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts. Yet some things outlast fire. A generation after the city fell, a Roman merchant sailed into the bay, his ship loaded with grain. He anchored near the ruins and went ashore, curious. The soil, sown with salt, was barren, but he noticed something odd, a few scrawny olive shoots pushing through the earth, their roots clinging to cracks in the stone. "Stubborn things," he muttered, and left them be. Years later, another ship arrived, this one carrying engineers. Rome, ever practical, had decided the site was too good to waste. They drained the harbor, cleared the rubble, and laid out a new city, Colonia Julia Carthago, a Roman colony with straight streets, a forum, and temples to Jupiter and Mars. It grew quickly, its docks filling with ships again, its markets bustling with traders from across the empire. But this was not Carthage. The new citizens spoke Latin, not Phoenician. Their ships sailed under Roman flags, not the symbol of Tanit. The cleverness, the fire, the otherness that had made old Carthage unique was gone, replaced by the steady, methodical order Rome loved. Still, traces lingered. Roman farmers in the countryside found old Phoenician pots buried in their fields, their surfaces painted with ships and sea monsters. They used them to store olive oil, never knowing the stories they held. Sailors in the new harbor swore by Carthaginian knots, a way of tying ropes that never slipped, taught to them by old slaves who remembered their grandfathers using the same knots on Carthaginian ships. Even the Roman love of purple dye, once a luxury only kings could afford, spread because traders in the new colony revived the old Phoenician method of squeezing color from murex snails. Stories, too, refused to die. In Rome, poets wrote of Dido, the tragic queen who had fled Tyre and built a city from an oxhide. Virgil, in his great epic the Aeneid, told of her love for Aeneas, a Trojan hero, and her heartbreak when he left to found Rome. She chose death over dishonor, he wrote, and though his tale was more myth than truth, it caught something real, the passion, the stubborn pride that had defined Carthage. Hannibal, too, became a legend. Parents in Rome told their children, "Be brave, like Hannibal, though not against Rome." Generals studied his tactics, copying the way he had circled behind enemies at Cannae, the way he had turned the Alps from a barrier into a weapon. He was a genius, they admitted, even as they cursed his name. But the truest legacy of Carthage was not in pots or poems or battle tactics. It was in the question it left behind: what if? What if a civilization built on trade, not war, on cleverness, not conquest, on 1,000 different voices, not one? What if that had been the future? Rome gave the Mediterranean peace, order, roads that stretched from Britain to Egypt. But in that order, something was lost, the wild, unpredictable spark that had made Carthage sail beyond the pillars of Hercules, that had made its merchants dream of tin mines in Britain and markets in West Africa. Centuries later, travelers visited the ruins of old Carthage. They walked among the broken walls, and some swore they could hear things: the clatter of a smith's hammer, the murmur of a crowd in the marketplace, the soft chime of a temple bell. A few even claimed to find small, thin strips of leather buried in the soil, remnants, they thought, of the oxhide that had started it all. And in the end, that is how stories survive. Not in stone, but in memory. In the way a sailor ties a knot, in the way a poet imagines a queen, in the quiet wonder of a child hearing, for the first time, once, there was a city by the sea that refused to be forgotten. The waves still lap at the shore where Carthage once stood, as they did when Dido first stepped onto that African beach. They carry the salt of the sea, and the echo of a question that will never quite be answered: what else might the world have been? But perhaps that is enough. To wonder. To remember. To keep the spark alive, even in the ashes. Now, as the moon dips lower and the stars grow brighter, let the stories of Carthage drift with you into sleep. Good night, and sweet dreams.